On our anniversary, he danced with his mistress. Few weeks later, I made him regret it. On our wedding anniversary, as the guests clapped and the music played, my husband pulled his mistress onto the dance floor and held her like I never existed. I stood there, humiliated, every eye on me, every whisper cutting deeper than a knife. But not long after, he learned why betraying me in public was the worst mistake of his life. This is the story of a wife's public disgrace, and the revenge that made him regret it all. What do you think I did to him? Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together, we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. The chandeliers in the Parker estate glittered like diamonds, throwing light across the marble floors where servants hurried with trays of champagne. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. Music played softly in the background, the kind of polished jazz that set the tone for an evening meant to impress. To everyone in the room, Richard and Emily Parker were the perfect couple. He, the charming businessman whose company had doubled in value in the last 5 years. She, the graceful wife who carried herself with quiet elegance, never once stepping out of line, never once taking the spotlight. Emily's dress was pale blue satin, carefully chosen for this night, their 10th anniversary. She had wanted to look her best for Richard, though she wasn't sure anymore if he would even notice. For weeks, he had been distracted, his phone buzzing late at night, his eyes sliding away when she asked where he'd been. Still, Emily told herself this night would be different. Tonight, he would remember what they had built together. "Emily, darling," a woman's voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Margaret, one of Richard's business partner's wives. "You look radiant. 10 years already. You and Richard are such an inspiration." Emily smiled politely. "Thank you, Margaret. It feels like only yesterday." But inside, her heart was uneasy. She scanned the crowd, trying to spot Richard. He was surrounded, of course, laughing with investors, shaking hands with men in tailored suits. He had always been magnetic in public, the kind of man everyone gravitated toward. Yet tonight, his smile seemed sharper, forced somehow, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Finally, Richard raised a glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, "thank you for joining us on this special evening. 10 years with my beautiful wife, Emily. 10 years of success, of love, and of building a life together. To many more." Everyone clapped. Emily's throat tightened as she waited for him to gesture toward her, to invite her to stand by his side. Instead, he sipped his champagne, gave her a brief glance, and turned back to his friends. Margaret leaned close, whispering, "He's just nervous, dear." Men don't always know how to show their feelings. Emily forced a smile, but the sting cut deep. She had spent nights helping Richard polish speeches, correcting his grammar, teaching him which fork to use at dinners when he was climbing his way up the ladder. And now, when he should be thanking her, she was nothing more than a shadow in the corner. The evening went on, the chatter growing louder as the drinks flowed. At last, the band struck up a livelier tune, and the dance floor cleared. Guests clapped and called for the couple to share the first dance, as tradition demanded. Emily's heart fluttered nervously. This was her moment, their moment. She smoothed her dress, ready to step forward. Richard walked toward the dance floor, smiling broadly. For 1 second, Emily thought he would reach for her hand, but then his arm stretched past her, landing on the wrist of Claire Benson. Claire. Young, golden-haired, with a sly smile and eyes that seemed to challenge every woman in the room. She was Richard's new assistant, at least that's what he told everyone. Emily had long suspected there was more, but she had no proof, until now. The room went still. A hush spread as Richard pulled Claire into the spotlight, ignoring the stunned silence of his wife. "Dance with me," he said to Claire, his voice low but audible. Emily's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to scream, to stop him, but her feet were glued to the floor. The band played on. Richard held Claire close, too close. Their bodies swayed together, his hand resting on her lower back, in a way he hadn't touched Emily in months. Claire's head tilted back as she laughed softly, her red lips brushing his ear. Gasps rippled through the guests. Whispers cut through the music like knives. "Is that his wife?" "No, that's the assistant, isn't it?" Poor Emily. Emily stood frozen, her face burning. Every eye in the room seemed to pierce her, pity and judgment mingling in their stares. She forced her lips into a faint smile, but her chest ached so badly she thought she might collapse. The dance went on, far too long, every second stretching like an eternity. Richard spun Claire in his arms, laughing as though the world belonged to them. It was cruel, deliberate, a performance meant for everyone to see. When the music ended, the applause was hesitant, awkward. A few polite claps, nothing more. Richard bowed dramatically, kissing Claire's hand, and escorted her back toward the table. He didn't glance at Emily once. Emily's fingers dug into the fabric of her dress. Her nails left marks on the satin, but she didn't care. Inside, something inside her cracked. The man she had given her life to, the man she had believed in, had just shattered her in front of everyone. Margaret whispered again, "Emily, say something. Do something." But Emily only shook her head. If she spoke now, she would break. Instead, she turned and slipped quietly toward the terrace doors, her heels clicking on the marble as though announcing her shame. The night air hit her face, cool and sharp, and for the first time all evening, she let her tears fall. Behind her, laughter echoed through the hall, and she knew it wasn't the laughter of strangers, it was Richard's. Emily gripped the railing of the terrace, staring into the darkness of the garden below. The roses Richard had ordered for the event lined the path, hundreds of them, blood red under the glow of the lights. They were supposed to symbolize love. Tonight they looked like silent witnesses to her humiliation. Her hands shook as she wiped her cheeks. She hated that she cried. Weakness was what Richard always accused her of when she asked him to spend more time with her. "Emily, you're too sensitive. Stop being dramatic," he would say, dismissing her pain as if it didn't matter. Inside, the music changed to another lively tune. Laughter rose again, sharper this time. Emily couldn't bring herself to walk back into the crowd. She didn't want to see their faces, the pity in their eyes, the gossip already spreading like wildfire. Just as she turned to leave the terrace, she heard voices. The door on the far side opened. Richard's voice carried easily. "You were perfect out there, Claire. Did you see their faces? God, I wish I could have taken a picture." Claire giggled, her heels clicking against the stone floor. Everyone was staring. "You made your point loud and clear." Emily froze. She slipped behind one of the large potted palms, holding her breath. Richard's voice grew lower, but not soft enough. "Emily's pathetic. She'll never leave. She doesn't have the strength. I could dance with you in front of her every night and she'd still stay. Too weak to walk away, too scared to be on her own." Claire's laugh was like glass breaking. She looked like a ghost standing there. You should have seen her face. Priceless. Richard chuckled. "She'll get over it. She always does. That's the thing about Emily. She was made to endure. And I was made to enjoy life. With you, Emily's nails dug into the bark of the palm tree until pain shot through her fingers. Her chest burned. The man she had built a life with, the man she had sacrificed for, was not only unfaithful, he mocked her weakness, as if she were nothing more than a dull inconvenience. Claire's voice softened. "When are you going to tell her it's over?" "She's holding you back, Richard. You deserve someone who belongs in your world. Someone like me. Richard sighed, but his tone was careless. Soon. Let her enjoy tonight. After all, she planned this whole circus. Might as well let her feel important for one last time. They both laughed again, their voices floating like poison into the night air. Emily stood perfectly still. She wanted to scream, to confront them right there, to tear down the smugness in their voices. But she didn't move. She realized with sudden clarity that her anger was stronger than her sorrow. Richard thought she was weak. He thought she would accept anything he threw at her. That was his mistake. Emily straightened, her tears drying on her cheeks. Her body shook, but not from sadness anymore. A new fire was burning in her chest, hotter and sharper than grief. She stepped back toward the shadows, careful not to let them hear her. From behind the palm tree, she watched Richard press a kiss to Claire's hand, the same gallant gesture he had once reserved for her. The sight made her stomach twist, but she didn't look away. She wanted to remember this moment, burn it into her memory. Richard's words repeated in her head. She's too weak to ever leave me. Emily whispered to herself, so softly that only the roses could hear. No, Richard. I'm not weak. You just made the mistake of underestimating me. The band inside struck up another song. The guests clapped and cheered, unaware of the vow forming in Emily's heart. She lifted her chin, wiped the last tear from her cheek, and walked back into the shadows of the house. From that moment on, Emily Parker was no longer the silent, patient wife Richard believed she was. She was something else entirely. Something he would come to fear. And though the party carried on with laughter and music, a storm had already begun to gather. Quiet, but unstoppable, inside the heart of the woman Richard had just betrayed. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give future to children and women abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing to hitting the subscribe button and turning on your notification bell. Also let us know in the comments where you are watching us from and how this story hit home for you. The morning after the anniversary party, the Parker estate was silent. Servants moved quietly, as if sensing the storm that had not yet passed. Emily sat at the long dining table, untouched coffee cooling in front of her. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's hand on Claire's waist, his lips close to her ear, and heard his mocking laughter on the terrace. When Richard finally came down, he was dressed immaculately in a dark suit, briefcase in hand, as if nothing had happened. "Morning," he said casually, kissing the air near her cheek without touching her skin. "Big meeting today. Don't wait up for me." Emily's hands clenched in her lap. She looked at him, her voice steady despite the fury burning inside. "Richard, we need to talk." He sighed, rolling his eyes like a teenager caught sneaking out. "Emily, not now. I don't have time for your moods." "Moods?" She stood, her chair scraping the marble floor. "You humiliated me last night, in front of everyone. You danced with her, your mistress, in our house, on our anniversary." Richard froze for a split second, then smirked. "You're overreacting. Claire is a colleague. The dance meant nothing." "Nothing?" Emily's voice cracked. "I heard you. On the terrace. I heard everything you said about me." The smirk vanished, replaced by irritation. He dropped his briefcase on the table with a loud thud. "So you were eavesdropping." "That's low, Emily. Really low." Her chest tightened. "Low. You betrayed me. And you don't even deny it." He leaned closer, his tone sharp, cruel. "Do you want to know the truth? You're boring, Emily. You make everything heavy. Claire, she's exciting. She makes me feel alive. And you—" He paused, his eyes cold. "You just make me feel trapped." The words hit her like a slap. For years she had supported him, sacrificing her own dreams so he could build his empire. Now he looked at her like she was nothing but dead weight. Before she could respond, he straightened, checking his watch. "We'll talk later. Don't embarrass yourself by bringing this up again in front of anyone. You'll only make yourself look desperate." He picked up his briefcase and walked out, leaving Emily shaking at the table, the echo of his footsteps ringing in her ears. The days that followed were worse. Richard stopped coming home most nights. When he did, he acted as if Emily were a stranger in his house. The staff, loyal to him, avoided her eyes. And then there was Victoria Parker, Richard's older sister. Victoria had never accepted Emily. Born into wealth, she looked down on Emily's middle-class background, mocking her as the charity case Richard brought home. With Richard drifting further away, Victoria pounced like a hawk, circling prey. One afternoon, Emily found Victoria waiting in the parlour, sipping tea. "You poor thing," Victoria said sweetly, though her eyes glittered with malice. That little display at the party was awkward, wasn't it? I told Richard he shouldn't be so obvious, but then again, maybe he wanted everyone to see. Perhaps it was his way of preparing you for what comes next. Emily sat stiffly across from her. "What comes next?" Victoria smiled. "Oh, don't be naive. Richard has options now. You've had your time. 10 years is a long run for someone like you, but Richard is destined for more, better. Surely you can't expect him to stay tied down forever." Emily's jaw tightened. "I'm his wife. I stood by him when he had nothing," Victoria shrugged. "And now he has everything. Don't take it personally, dear. Men like Richard don't stay loyal to the women who built them. They move on." Her words were venom wrapped in silk. Emily wanted to scream at her, but instead she rose silently and left the room. Emily found herself more isolated by the day. Former friends stopped calling, afraid of being caught between sides. The only person who remained loyal was Sarah Mitchell, her childhood friend. Sarah came to visit one afternoon, bringing a casserole as if Emily were grieving a death. "I heard things," Sarah whispered, sitting close. "Emily, you need to know. Claire isn't just some fling. She's been planning this for a long time. She's been whispering lies into Richard's ear, telling him you waste money, that you gossip about him, that you're dragging down his reputation. She's poisoning him against you." Emily's chest tightened. Why would he believe her over me? "Because she tells him what he wants to hear," Sarah said gently. "She makes him feel like he's the hero. And she's smart, too smart. I even heard Richard transferred money into her name, properties, investments. He's securing her future, Emily, not yours." The words made Emily's stomach churn. Not only was he betraying her emotionally, he was dismantling everything they had built together. The final blow came during a dinner with Richard's family. Emily, desperate to cling to some dignity, attended in silence. The table was long, the silverware gleaming, the food rich. But beneath the surface, poison brewed. Victoria, seated beside Richard, smiled wickedly as she raised her glass. "To Richard, and to the future. Change is a good thing, isn't it? Sometimes an upgrade is exactly what a man needs." The table erupted in laughter. Richard chuckled along, glancing at Emily only once, his eyes cold and dismissive. Emily sat frozen, her face burning. It was no longer just Richard betraying her. It was his whole family, complicit in her humiliation. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She searched through Richard's office, desperation guiding her hands. In the locked drawer of his desk, she found what she feared: legal papers, divorce proceedings, her name typed neatly across the top. His lawyers already preparing to strip her of everything: property, finances, even her dignity. Emily's hands shook as she read the words. Richard had not even told her. He was preparing to discard her quietly, as though she were nothing more than a mistake to erase. For a long time she sat in the dark, the papers spread across her lap. Pain threatened to crush her, but beneath it burned something else. Richard thought he could take everything, but he was wrong. Emily folded the papers slowly, her tears dry, her face hardening. She whispered into the silence of the room. He wants war. Then war is what he'll get. The weeks after discovering the divorce papers felt like walking through a nightmare. Emily had thought the anniversary night was the lowest point of her life. But she was wrong. That night had only been the beginning of her fall. Richard moved quickly. He stopped pretending to be discreet. Claire was on his arm at dinners, at charity events, even at the same restaurants where he once held Emily's hand. They laughed loudly, kissed openly, and fed the press photographs that painted them as the city's new it couple. Emily's phone stopped ringing. The women who had once smiled at her across luncheon tables now ignored her calls. When she bumped into them on the street, their smiles were tight, their excuses quick. The whispers followed her everywhere. She couldn't keep him. I heard she's unstable. Richard said she was obsessed with him, always checking his phone, always crying. The lies spread like wildfire, and Emily realized Richard was behind it. He wasn't satisfied with just leaving her. He wanted to ruin her reputation, to make sure when the divorce became public, she would look like the problem. At the grocery store, a woman she had known for years looked her up and down and said, "You should have been a better wife, Emily." The words cut so deep, she barely made it home before breaking down in sobs. Nights were the hardest. Emily lay in their bed alone, staring at the empty space where Richard once slept. Sometimes she thought about leaving, about packing her things and disappearing before the divorce papers were finalized. But each time, something inside her refused. Running would mean letting Richard win, but the weight of it all pressed harder each day. The loneliness, the whispers, the betrayal of people she once trusted. Sarah was the only one who stayed by her side, but even she couldn't fill the silence of Emily's life. One night, Emily sat at the dining table with the legal papers spread in front of her. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them again. If she signed, she would lose everything. If she fought, Richard would destroy her in court. A dark thought crossed her mind. An escape from all of it. But as quickly as it came, she shoved it away. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and stared into the night, whispering, "There has to be something he doesn't want me to know. Something I can use." The turning point came almost by accident. Sarah had connections in places Emily didn't, and one afternoon she rushed over, her eyes wide. "Emily, I found something. Claire, she isn't who she says she is." Emily's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "Her real name isn't Claire Benson," Sarah whispered, sliding a manila folder across the table. "It's Clarissa Bennett. She has a record, fraud, theft, even a charge for blackmail. She changed her name and slipped into Richard's company as an assistant. She's been playing him from the beginning." Emily's hands shook as she opened the folder. Mugshots stared back at her. Newspaper clippings, police reports, sealed court documents Sarah had somehow pulled together. Clarissa, was no innocent young woman in love. She was a predator, the kind who built her life on manipulation. Emily's first reaction was disbelief, then came anger. Richard had destroyed their marriage, their home, for a woman with a criminal past. And he had no idea. Sarah touched her hand. "This could ruin them both. But there's more. You need to check Richard's accounts. Something doesn't add up." That night, Emily searched through Richard's files again. She remembered his words about her being weak, about never leaving. The thought fueled her as she dug deeper into his hidden drawers and encrypted folders. What she found made her blood run cold. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, funds moved in and out under her name. Richard hadn't just been cheating. He had been using her identity, forging her signature, laundering money through her as cover. If it came to light, Emily would be the one blamed. She would be painted not only as the broken wife, but as the criminal who betrayed her husband. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, papers scattered around her. Tears blurred her vision, but anger sharpened every thought. Richard wasn't just leaving her, he was setting her up to take the fall, the humiliation, the lies, the loneliness, the betrayal by his family. It had all been unbearable. But this was unforgivable. She sat in the dark for hours, staring at the evidence. She could almost hear Richard's mocking voice. "She's too weak to ever leave me." Emily whispered into the silence. "You think I'm weak, Richard? You'll see what weakness looks like when it destroys you." The days that followed were different. Emily moved carefully, quietly. She was still shunned in public, still whispered about, but now she didn't break when she heard it. Every insult, every pitying look, only fueled her resolve. She gathered everything: Claire's criminal history, Richard's financial crimes, the forged documents. She organized them neatly, creating a trail no one could deny. She rehearsed what she would say when the time came, her words sharp in her mind. Richard flaunted Claire more boldly than ever, parading her through the same restaurants where Emily had once celebrated anniversaries. He thought Emily was finished, broken. He thought she was waiting quietly for the divorce papers to become official. But Emily had a different plan. She wouldn't just leave him. She wouldn't just fight him in court. She would expose him publicly, the way he had exposed her. She would humiliate him in front of the same crowd that had watched her humiliation. The storm inside her had taken shape, and Richard Parker had no idea it was coming. The ballroom glittered with gold and silver as chandeliers hung like crowns above the crowd. Waiters moved in perfect rhythm, pouring champagne into crystal flutes. Laughter and music filled the air, the kind of sound that only came from people who believed they were untouchable. This was Richard Parker's night. The invitation called it a business gala, but everyone knew it was more than that. Rumor whispered that Richard planned to make a personal announcement, an engagement to the radiant Claire Benson. Emily stood outside the entrance, her dress simple but striking, a dark velvet that framed her pale skin and determined eyes. She clutched a slim folder and a small USB drive in her purse. Her heart pounded, but her steps were steady. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. Tonight, she would not cry. Tonight, she would not be invisible. The guards at the door hesitated when they saw her. "Mrs. Parker," one began, but she cut him off with a calm smile. "Not Mrs. Parker," Emily said evenly. "Not for much longer." "But you'll let me in. He'll want me here." Something in her voice, steady, commanding, made the guard step aside. Emily walked into the ballroom, her heels striking the marble like a drumbeat. Heads turned. Whispers rose. She felt the eyes on her, the same eyes that had pitied and mocked her weeks before. But she didn't shrink under their gaze this time. She walked straight to the back of the room, waiting in the shadows until the moment came. At the front, Richard was radiant in his tailored tuxedo, Claire glittering beside him in a silver gown that clung to her curves. They looked like royalty, smiling as cameras flashed, basking in the envy of the crowd. When the music lowered, Richard raised his glass, his voice carrying with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for being here tonight. For years, I've built this company with passion, with vision, and with the support of people like you. Tonight isn't just about business, it's about celebrating the future. A future with the woman who has brought new light into my life, Claire." Applause broke out, cameras flashing again as Claire blushed and pressed her hand to her chest. Richard smiled like a man who had everything he ever wanted. That was when Emily stepped forward. Her voice rang out, calm but sharp as glass. "Funny, Richard. You forgot to mention the wife who built that future for you. The wife you tried to erase." The room froze. Heads whipped toward her. Richard's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing when he saw her walking toward the stage. "Emily," he said through clenched teeth, his microphone still amplifying his voice. "This isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time. Emily replied, climbing the steps to the stage. She turned to the audience, her voice steady, cutting through the silence. You all see Richard Parker as a brilliant businessman, a devoted partner. But let me show you who he really is. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Emily pulled the USB drive from her purse. She nodded toward the projector set up for Richard's presentation. A young technician hesitated, but one sharp look from her made him obey. Within seconds, the screen behind them flickered to life. The first image, bank records, transfers from Richard's accounts to Claire's, hundreds of thousands moved in secret. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Richard's face reddened. This is nonsense! Fabricated! Emily ignored him. The next file appeared. Documents showing forged signatures, her name used to launder money, accounts opened illegally in her identity. Gasps turned into shouts. Some people stood, snapping pictures. Richard's business partners leaned toward one another, their expressions darkening. But Emily wasn't finished. The final image filled the screen. Claire's mugshot. Underneath, bold letters displayed her real name, Clarissa Bennett, followed by a list of charges, fraud, theft, blackmail. The ballroom erupted. Shouts of shock, disbelief, and disgust filled the air. Cameras flashed wildly. Claire's face went pale as she stumbled backward, shaking her head. No, Claire whispered, her voice trembling. That was years ago. It's not Richard. I can explain. But Richard had already stepped away from her, his fury spilling out. You lied to me. Claire's eyes darted around wildly, the crowd closing in like wolves. Without another word, she bolted from the stage, shoving through the guests as humiliation burned across her face. Emily stood tall, her hands steady, her voice ringing with the strength Richard once said she never had. You called me weak, Richard. You told her I was too scared to leave, too scared to fight. You thought you could humiliate me in front of everyone, and I would endure it in silence. But tonight, I am not silent. She stepped closer, her eyes locking on his. On our anniversary, you made me invisible. Tonight, I've made sure the world sees you for what you really are, a liar, a thief, and a coward. The room roared with whispers and accusations. Richard's business partners shouted over one another, some demanding explanations, others already walking out in disgust. His family, seated at the front, looked horrified. Even Victoria, who had always sneered at Emily, sat frozen in shock. Security stepped forward. The head of the gala whispered something into Richard's ear, and Richard's face twisted in rage. You'll regret this, Emily, he hissed under his breath. But his words had no power anymore. Two guards took him by the arms. For the first time in his life, Richard Parker was escorted out of his own event, not with applause, but with jeers and flashing cameras. The same way Emily had once walked out of her anniversary party in shame, Richard was now dragged away in disgrace. Silence hung in the room for a beat, then the crowd erupted into chaos. But Emily didn't stay to watch. She turned from the stage, her steps steady, her head high. She had done what she came to do. As she walked out of the ballroom, she felt the stares following her. But this time they weren't filled with pity or scorn. They were filled with awe. She was no longer the broken wife. She was the woman who had brought down Richard Parker. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. The city stretched before her, wide and endless. For the first time in months she breathed deeply, her chest light, her spirit unchained. She whispered to herself, "It's over. I'm free." The moral of her story was clear, though she didn't need to say it aloud. Betrayal might shine bright for a moment, but truth and patience always turned the tide. Richard had built his empire on lies, but in the end, it had crumbled in the same public way he had once tried to destroy her. Emily walked into the night, her dignity intact, her power reclaimed, and somewhere inside her, the broken pieces of her heart began to mend. Not because Richard was gone, but because she had finally remembered who she was without him.